In the last 200 years, there have been only 20 known cases of restored vision. A new film, At First Sight, tells the story of one of them. Virgil Adamson is a man who has been blind for almost his entire life. Here is a trailer.
Why do you put up with me? Why do you try so hard?
I want this to work. I want us to work.
Joining me now, Irwin Winkler, the film's director and producer. He is the Oscar Award-winning producer of such films as Rocky, Raging Bulls, and Goodfellas. Also here, Val Kilmer, who stars as Virgil Adamson. His films include The Doors, Batman, Forever, and The Saint. And Dr. Oliver Sacks. His article, To See and Not See, is the best-selling book. Anthropologist on Mars is inspiration for the film. I am pleased to have them here. Dr. Sacks, where does this story come from?
It comes from reality. It started with a phone call telling me that Virgil had had some surgery to his eyes and that he saw everything but couldn't make sense of anything.
Yeah.
And could I come down and explore this and help?
And so what did you do?
So I went down and as you were saying, this is a very, very rare situation. I'd never encountered it before, although I'd read about it. And I tried to sort of feel myself into his world and to help him a bit. Since really he'd never seen, the parts of his brain which normally develop in infancy hadn't been there. He'd never learned to see. You have to learn to see. We're not cameras. And so I tried to help him on that track. And very complicated business, because all his feelings and his motivations, his strategies were those of a blind man. He'd really been in equilibrium as a blind man, and suddenly he had a new sense forced on him, given to him.
From a medical standpoint, I want to come to what we do in the film, but from a medical standpoint, what happens when sight is restored? What's the thing that goes through it? It depends on when you went blind, I guess. If you went blind at childbirth, it's different than if you went blind when you were 20.
Well, in a way, this isn't sight restored. He'd never had sight.
Right.
He had no idea what sight was like, or very little idea, no visual memories, no visual ideas. And so, so the whole idea of space and a visual world and of appearances and perspective and size and distance were completely alien to him. I mean, unimaginably so. There's really no analogy in our experience.
When did you learn about this?
I read the article that Dr. Sacks wrote that was in the New Yorker magazine, and I was just bowled over by the whole possibility of, everything I read is about whether it will make a movie or not. When I pick up the New York Times, it will make a movie. And this seemed like a really interesting story, because I just imagined if somebody was blind and had an operation, they took off the bandages and you see, and everything is fine. And the phenomena of not seeing intrigued me, and the idea of then showing a world that had never been shown before was intriguing, and I started thinking about how I would do that visually, and I got more and more involved in the character, and started doing some other research into the subject, and there's very little about it, but whatever we found was mostly about people that had been sighted and gone blind, and so little about anybody that had been blind and then suddenly got sighted. So I just got more intrigued with the character, and then thought we'd develop a love story around it so that we can give it a kind of a feeling where both characters had some risk involved and something to challenge them.
What's the love story?
Well, what happened to Cheryl Jennings, who is the man who actually had the operation, is he was very comfortable in his blind world. He had a job, he loved baseball, and he listened to baseball games. He traveled back and forth to the job that he worked in, and seemingly was quite content with the life that he had as a blind man. A woman came into his life and found out about this experimental eye surgery and suggested he have this operation. And he did, and we know what happened, all the problems that came to this blind man as a sighted person. And I was interested in how that would affect their relationship, and why she wanted him to suddenly have this operation, why he resisted initially. And it seemed to me a good sense of drama and how to build a love story. In film terms, people falling in love is not particularly interesting. That's just a montage. People having a problem once they're in love is interesting. So built into this situation seem to be problems.
In an article that was about you in January 5th, 1999, in Variety, to talk about your experiences, and you were looking at common threads in your films, and you said that many of my films deal with the same kind of idea. That is, what people do under pressure, how they respond to the circumstances around them. Ultimately, Winkler concludes they're about test of character. Is this about that?
I think so. I think because Cheryl Jennings had to have had to be very, very strong in himself and ultimately in his relationship with Barbara, his current wife, because you could be very, very depressed very easily when you change your life so violently, and as Dr. Sachs said, going into a world that none of us could imagine. Look, Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull faced adversity with violence. It's the only thing he knew. Rocky just became a better person. So I think Cheryl Jennings did it in an unqualified way, and that it was great courage.
What attracted you here, Val? The story, the character, the both?
Everything, yes. I've read it late at night, immediately closed my eyes, and spent a couple hours in the hotel room just trying to imagine it. I also have a very good friend who's a blind sculptor, so I could
blinded from Vietnam, is that right?
Yeah, and I could relate to a lot of the really extraordinary experiences that he had gone through, and was relating those to the character. And I met Irwin in the next morning, and by lunchtime the lawyers had called each other, and it was a fascinating. I said yes. Really everything that I always wanted to do a love story. I think in this case that it's a true story adds to the drama. Sometimes it's really immaterial. We all know what happens in Titanic. It's the experience of those two characters that makes it intimate and attractive. And in this case as well, I love that there's so many metaphors and really generous food for thought on the subject of sight as perception or love. And those kind of stories are
What's interesting
are
about
rare.
this you're touching on is the notion of how the love between the character played by Mira Sorvino, Amy, and Virgil, when he is without sight, and then how the relationship is different when he is with sight. And why does that come about? I mean,
well, as is often the case in love, after love at first sight, then you get down to the meat of the relationship and working it out. They both have fears. They also are not telling the truth to each other. He wants to make her happy. He's masking his feelings. There's a lot of fear involved. And I think we're really telling the emotional truth, wouldn't you agree, of their story? If we literally dealt with the exclusive subject of sight, the film would, the second half of the film, that's all it would be about, because it's so difficult to explain. So it's involved in the meat of the story is involved in making the relationship work. How does it happen, the miracle of love?
take a look at this clip. This is Virgil showing Amy, Val, and Mira Sorvino the rain. Take a look.
I can feel everything when it rains. Wish it would rain inside. Rain all around us.
I shoot him.
How do you prepare for this? I mean, is it as obvious as doing something opaque, contact lens, to get a feeling of what it is to walk around without sight?
We did that very quickly. Irwin and I came here very early on in our pre-production, and I just, beyond going around to the locations, just started going out on the streets and down in the subway and getting lost and asking for directions, and also became friends with a blind masseur here who had a very similar spirit to Cheryl and my friend. And I
What
found
was that?
just his very positive. You either, really in extreme minorities such as blindness, you either develop pretty good wit or you become angry. And it's easy to see why when you spend a little bit of time just with your eyes closed, and you have to be very strong, and at the same time, there are times when there's no way out of a situation. You must ask someone for help. And you can feel someone standing there on the corner, and they don't want to help you. They go ahead and cross the street, and you don't know which way to go. You know, it's moving.
Why is it so rare that sight's restored? Because it's so difficult? Because blindness is so... it's like a severed spinal cord or something?
Well, often there'd be some condition you couldn't do anything about. But if it's something like congenital cataracts, I think perhaps people hesitate because there's some idea that it may not work at all. Incidentally, I loved this scene in the movie which portrays the positivity of blindness so beautifully, and how blind people can become preternaturally sensitive to sound and create a sort of soundscapes all around them. I mean, sound is intensely important, and the sort of the... But I love that scene.
But you know, it's interesting. There's the opposite end of this scene as well. Later on in the film, after Val is sighted, he's walking down the street, and they pass a church, and the bells of the church are on. And Mira says, "Do you hear the bells?" And he doesn't pay any attention to them. Where he's so sensitive to all sounds around him when he's blind. When he's sighted, he's very much like all of us, paying very little attention to what's out there, so involved in themselves. So that's the contrary aspect of this. By the way, in that scene, they also pass a lump that's laying on the steps of a church. And Val says to Mira, what is that lump? And she said, "Oh, it's a homeless person, and there's some things you don't want to see." And he says, "I want to see everything." And then, of course, the homeless man starts yelling at him, "What are you looking at?" By the way, played by Mort Zuckerman. But in that one scene, it talks a lot about how much we want to see, how much our eyes want to avoid the truth when it's out there. And I think that's a part of the film that's really explores our own nature of seeing, how much we avoid in life, how much somebody who is newly sighted wants to get everything in.
Look, this is a clip that shows Virgil, played by Val, when he sees himself for the first time in the hotel room. We were just asking the question. I talked to someone who's had this laser surgery, and they were saying that, you know, it's just amazing. Go in for like an hour and you walk out and your vision has changed, but sometimes you get up in the morning, it's a little bit cloudy in the beginning. Right. And I asked the question while we were watching that of Dr. Sachs, is that always true, or can you come out of this with perfect vision and still feel the things that you felt because you don't have the spatial definition and all?
I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, that's part of the problem. Of course, it's so rare, but what we did in the film is dramatically show the first thing he sees when they take off the bandages, which is all kind of strange because he doesn't really understand dimensions. The room seems to move back on him, and we just kind of prepared a whole bunch of stuff that we ourselves thought he would see. However, the rest of the film is really everything as clear as can be. He can see everything we could see. He just doesn't know what anything is. He could be sitting across a table from a person. It could be a woman. It could be a man. It could be a child. He wouldn't know the difference.
No intellectual reference.
No vision. No knowledge at all.
Yeah. This business of seeing clearly but not having any idea what you're seeing, you know, can also occur with brain damage. It happened with the man who mistook his wife for a hat, and this is a condition of visual agnosia in the man who mistook it was due to brain damage. In Virgil's case was because those parts of the brain hadn't developed. But people like this, if they can draw well, can perhaps do a good portrait of someone or an object, but have no idea what they've drawn.
This story came to you from whom?
From the man himself, from Virgil, from his wife, and from his in-laws. It started with a phone call.
Yeah, in this story that you tell, you are a masseur in the Adirondacks, right? And Amy, Mira Sorvino, comes. She's the wife of an architect. She's an architect.
She's an ex-wife.
She's an ex-wife.
Yeah.
Stephen was an ex-wife of an architect. And she comes, and there's some magical feeling that she has because of the connection and all. Doesn't know he's blind in the beginning.
That's right.
You know?
And she's very stressed out, a very stressed out New York architect.
She's trying to escape
and,
whatever
yeah,
it is.
goes there to just kind of relax. And she goes into this place, takes him to, it's a dark room. She has no idea the man is blind. And he basically puts her in touch with herself, which a lot
because
of blind
he's blind?
people... Yeah, because he's blind. He's very... and one of the reasons I cast Val is because he's very in touch with nature and very in touch with himself. And Mira is, you know, from New York and kind of very combustible, and I thought that would be an interesting combination.
Why did you wait till you were 50 to direct? Because nobody would give you the opportunity.
No, what happened was I had no intention of directing. I wrote a script called Guilty by Suspicion, which was about the blacklist.
Robert De Niro.
Yeah, and I got very, very curious about the character because he reminded me somewhat of myself because the character I wrote was kind of successful, had worked all his life and had achieved something. And in the script, he goes into a room and an investigator for the House Un-American Activities Committee says to him, okay, you have a fancy house and a nice car and it's a great career, and all you have to do to keep it is betray your best friend. And I was haunted by that. I said, well, I wonder what I would do. It's wonderful to say, oh, I'd never do that, but as John le Carré said, when they handcuff you to a radiator, you might change your mind. So it kind of got me interested, and I wrote this script. We were doing Goodfellas at the time, so I gave Marty Scorsese the script to read, and unbeknownst to me, he gave it to De Niro. And Bob said he wanted to do it, and he wanted to do it with me directing it. So I suddenly found myself directing a movie.
Now, you didn't, Scorsese directed Raging Bull, and you
That's
produced
right.
it.
Yeah.
You went to Juilliard, right? You know, have you found in film what you expected to find as an actor? I mean, has it been what you wanted to do?
Yes, I really love acting in the theater as well, but film acting's fascinating. It's a real maze. Sometimes you get dropped right in the middle. We were very fortunate, I think, largely to do because of Irwin having some pull maybe, but being able to shoot in sequence, especially with a story like this,
You shot in sequence.
Yeah, pretty much so.
where they're really meeting each other immediately, and often I think it would help in film, and bizarrely it's like a law that you must shoot the last sequences first and the most strenuous scenes at the end when you have no energy left. It's a strange, a lot of bizarre, almost mystical rules to filmmaking. And one of the oddest things is that a play really has to work as a piece of text. And the screenplay is really an assemblage of ideas, well assembled, but it really has no meaning in a film. A film story is made up as it's going because it depends on light and the atmosphere in that light, of which, as we were talking before we started filming, no matter how extraordinary a director is, you can't control those elements, and eventually, even if you have unlimited resources, it changes, and it just has this strange life of its own, and you're really participating in the creation that's largely unknown.
Let me ask you this. I don't know, can we tell the ending of this movie?
Probably not a good idea.
Not a good idea,
Yeah.
but it's extraordinary. It goes to the heart of what the movie's about, doesn't it?
Very much so, yeah. Very much so. They'll have to pay their...
All right.
their part of that.
Okay. What did you learn from this?
My just appreciation for life really deepened from it. I feel that I'm attentive to friends and family and their needs, and by playing Virgil, which we're finding with the audiences, that they're coming out of the cinema experiencing, it's a great deal of gratitude, a deeper sense of love. And I couldn't ask for anything more of the love story than that. I love this quote, "Love never loses sight of loveliness," and for both the characters. I think they almost lose sight of the loveliness in love, and that's to me that I learned from it.
Dr. Sachs, do you think that Hollywood does justice to your work?
I was fascinated by Val's research, and as I was by De Niro's with Awakenings. In both cases, they seem to enter to sort of try and imagine the inner state of the subject so well. I mean, there were times when I thought you were blind. There were times when I thought De Niro was Parkinsonian. Yes, I can only describe and ponder, and Hollywood can provide an inaction and a representation, and I know some of my Awakenings patients loved Awakenings. I know Barbara and Shirl felt that there'd been an almost uncanny capturing of their situation, even though all sorts of personal things were different. So yes, I like it.
There's an amazing coincidence between the way this film unfolds and the way Awakening unfolded.
Yeah, there's a strong sort of metaphoric parallel.
Even more so. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank
At
you.
First Sight is the film. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow night.